2 days a week, I do what's called MAF training, and 1 day a week, I do hill repeats or intervals. VO2 max refers to maximum amount of oxygen that an individual can utilize during intense or maximal exercise. Dr. Peter Attia says that there is no number, there is no biomarker, there is no finding in all of biology that is more predictive of a person's length of life than that specific number, meaning your VO2 max number. April of 2023, my VO2 max was 45. About 5 months later, my VO2 max was 48. Now, depending on what chart you look at, that puts me in the very high category for my age. And Garmin says that my fitness age is 20, and I'm in the top 10% for my age group. Is my fitness age really 20? I don't know, but I will have to say that I feel much better today than I did 10 years ago at least. My goal is to get to the elite category for my age and then get to the elite category for someone 20 years younger than me. I have no idea if I can do that, but I believe it's possible, so I'm gonna try. Now, as mentioned, 2 days a week, I do what's called MAF training or Maffetone training. MAF training is a method developed by Dr. Philip Maffetone. Dr. Maffetone has 20 years experience practicing complementary sports medicine and applied kinesiology. He has an extensive background in biochemistry and exercise physiology, and he's trained many world-class and professional athletes. He's also helped a bunch of regular people just like me. With MAF training, you pick your favorite aerobic activity, and for me that's running, and you take the number 180, you subtract your age to get your target heart rate. So the goal is to keep your heart rate within 10 beats of that number, but not go above it. And there are some variables that you can apply to this number to adjust it up or down, but that's a topic for another video. So in my case, 180 minus my age of 52 equals 128. And for most of this year I've been using 129 because I forgot to factor in my birthday back in May. So my heart rate needs to be between 118 and 128. It can bounce above that momentarily, but you don't want it going above it for too long. It can go below that, below the low number, but you also don't want it to be below that number too long. The key is to keep it in that range as much as possible and as close to the high end as you can. This type of training is also often referred to as zone 2 training or low heart training or conversational pace, meaning that while you're doing this, you can carry on a conversation in full sentences, but if you went any faster, you would get too winded or be out of breath to keep talking. If it's really easy to carry on a conversation without getting winded, then you're going too slow. So for me, what that looks like is a very, very fast-paced walk to a slow run, and I have to alternate between the two. I use a heart rate monitor on my watch and keep an eye on it. Now, a chest strap would be a lot more accurate, and I have one. I just haven't started using it yet. But don't worry too much about that. If you have a Garmin or an Apple Watch, that'll work just fine. And you really do need to pay attention. It is very easy to be running along at what feels like a very comfortable pace, only to look down and see, oh, my heart rate is getting too high. So you have to check. And I do. I check, and when my heart rate bumps up against that high number, I slow down, and then I keep checking. And when my heart rate has dropped down about 7 to 10 beats, then I speed up again. It's really annoying at first, but you get used to it. It's been very hard for me to maintain a pace or find a pace that allows me to just sustain a certain heart rate consistently. So I kind of go back and forth. Also, I find that I have to go very, very slow. I'm still working on it. Now, the very interesting thing is that as you continue to train this way, you end up getting faster. It takes a while, but you get faster even while your heart rate remains at a lower rate. That lower MAF tone target, right? And this is awesome because it means that your body truly is getting more efficient. You know, I have a long way to go, but I've seen some people that have trained this way for many, many years, and they can run a 6.5 minute mile at their MAF target heart rate. That's incredible. So I wanted to give you a couple of tips in doing this. We'll call them pro tips, right? Not that I'm a pro by any means. If you see that your heart rate is bouncing up way too fast, like faster than normal, then that is a pretty good sign that you are either 1, overtrained, 2, you didn't get enough sleep last night, or 3, you're trying too hard. You're working too hard when you kind of trying to bring your heart rate back up. It's difficult because you have to go a lot slower than what you might feel like you can do, and so holding back is part of the challenge of doing this type of training. The other thing that I would mention is that you have to be really patient Like when I first started doing this, oh man, I felt like I was wasting my time because I wasn't seeing any improvement at all. You really, really are going slow. And there's this feeling of paranoia that if I'm not going fast, how am I ever going to increase my pace? I remember telling my wife what I was doing, you know, this maffetone training, low heart rate training, trying to explain it to her, and feeling like, you know, it had been a few months and I didn't feel like I was improving, and saying, oh man, I think I'm wasting my time. Here we are getting ready for the Grand Canyon. What have I done? And then I realized that I just wasn't going far enough, right? I wasn't doing enough. So I increased the miles. I increased from, at the time I was only doing 2 miles whenever I was doing a low heart rate session, and that's just not enough. You got to go faster, or farther, I mean. So, or more time, more accurately, right? So I ended up increasing it to 4 miles each time, which really isn't that far. Then I started noticing improvements. And once I got to like somewhere between 40 minutes and an hour, I started noticing a very small incremental improvements over time. And so then I realized, hey, it is working. It feels like a contradiction because you feel like you're not working hard enough to make improvements. But the reality is that the improvements are happening. You're building up your aerobic base, and it just takes time. One more thought about building an aerobic base. Why do we want to do that? I mean, aside from, you know, if you're preparing for some athletic event like me going to the Grand Canyon, but why do we want to build an aerobic base for life? Doing this type of training, low heart rate or zone 2 training, helps to stimulate your body to produce more mitochondria, and also not just produce more mitochondria, but to make the mitochondria that you have healthier and more efficient. It also will stimulate your body to go through a process of recycling old, worn out mitochondria through a process called mitophagy. So these things that, you know, the better mitochondria you have, more mitochondria you have, healthier mitochondria you have, the healthier you are and the more energy you have, which is really important for longevity in general. Another great thing about MAF training or zone 2 training is that it trains your body to burn fat more efficiently. That's awesome. But we're talking about increasing VO2 max. So let's talk about that. What else can we do? What do we need to do to increase VO2 max? To increase VO2 max, you also need to train in such a way that you push your heart rate up. Not necessarily to its absolute all-out max, but it needs to be up really high for a period of time. In this case, you don't have to worry about checking your heart rate monitor, and the best way to do this is by doing something called intervals. The way Dr. Attia explains it is that after you've warmed up for a little bit, you want to run, bike, swim, or row, or whatever your chosen aerobic activity is, for about 3 to 4 minutes really hard as you can, to maintain that pace for 3 to 4 minutes. So much so that it would be hard to continue, hard to go longer than 4 minutes, but not so hard that you can't maintain that pace for that period of time. Then you slow down for about 3 to 4 minutes or a little longer to let your heart rate come back down until you recover fully or recover enough to do it again. He says it's best to do about 4 of these intervals in a given workout. And he also says that doing this type of workout, you only have to do it once a week. That's all that's needed. Now, what I've been doing is I've been going hiking, and specifically hiking up hills, or doing what's called hill repeats once a week. So kind of like intervals, I'm just going up and down a hill. As I was training for the Grand Canyon back in October, I noticed that my VO2 max began to go up, and I realized that doing hill repeats was training my VO2 max very similar to doing intervals. I go uphill and I push the pace, not so hard that I have to stop to take a long break to catch my breath, but hard enough that going faster would be too much. Now, during this time, my heart rate will go up pretty high, in the high 160s, or at most the low 170s. The highest I've seen my heart rate so far has been 174. Then I go back down the hill and my heart rate comes back down, and by the time I reach the bottom, I'm ready to go again. Now, here's the crazy thing. So our plan was to go to the Grand Canyon and do rim to rim to rim in October. That's about 45 miles and 11,000 feet of elevation gain. I was doing my MAF training, but I knew that the training that really gets you ready for something like that is going up hills and going down hills, and then going up hills and going down hills as much as possible. And I have to say that I had put it off And I just didn't want to start, right? So I didn't start until late August. Starting in August to the end of September, about 6 weeks total, my VO2 max went from 46 to 48. And that's a very short period of time when you're speaking in VO2 max training terms. It takes a long time to improve it. So I'm convinced that hiking up hills is one of the very best exercises you can do to increase VO2 max. At least it has been for me. And I have to pause right there and point out that with all of this in mind, I had already had a pretty good fitness base before starting this training. That said though, my VO2 max was pretty much the same for most of the year until I increased my MAF training and I also started doing hill repeats. It's also important to note that the closer we got to the time of actually going to the Grand Canyon, the longer my workouts became. So for example, my longest workout was 14 hill repeats, which for the mountain I go to ended up being about 12 miles and a total of 4,800 feet of elevation gain. And it took me about 4.5 hours. I know that's a very long workout, right? So it seems clear to me that the longer workouts made a big difference, but I'm curious if I can make the same improvements with shorter workouts, maybe 4 to 6 hill repeats and push the pace a little bit, maybe a little bit more than I was, rather than doing 14 and spending all that time. I'm also planning on adding another day of MAF training to do 3 days a week instead of just 2. You don't need to be training for the Grand Canyon or a marathon or an ultra marathon or some big event like that to increase your VO2 max. And you don't need to go all out and hike for 5 hours up hills to do that. But you do need to move and you do need to put in the work. And you will find that a little bit over time will make a big difference, and that will impact your life and make you feel better, give you more energy, and help you to age a little bit slower.